this is a series. We are now coming toward the end of discussions which concerns the most famous and consequently probably most frequently read scriptures of the Nag Hammadi collection. As you know, because I mentioned it, I mention a lot of things and people don't know them, so I don't know why I say that. But in any event, as you may recall, I said that curiously enough, synchronistically perhaps, there are 4 canonical Gospels in the New Testament, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, about which a kind of silly ditty has been written once, and since I like silly verses, I'm trying to recall. It was in any way, it's about the four that the punchline was that the 4 Gospels are about the same person, and still each one has a different plot. Now, interestingly and synchronistically enough, the Nag Hammadi library also has 4 scriptures among the many, many scriptures that it has. It has 4 scriptures that are in the title of the scripture itself called Gospels, which is an old English word that I didn't know. So I'm not a gospel Christian, and the word would have been unknown to me in my European studies anyway. But so I tried to find out where the heck does that word gospel come from. And there was a very learned gentleman and a darling friend, Professor John Algeo, who taught for many years in Atlanta, who was a great expert on the English language, and he said it comes from the word God spell, that a text of a sacred nature is a spell, and so that was a God spell. It's supposed to be a translation into English of the Greek word evangelion, which means a happy message. And I made a joke about that last time. I'm not going to repeat the same joke twice because that's impolite. So let us say that even as there are 4 Gospels that were declared official by the Christian Church, which means they could be entered into the canon, which really just means the big book, and therefore called canonical. So there are 4 scriptures in the Nag Hammadi collection which bear the title Gospel in their actual title, and these 4 are Thomas, Philip, the Gospel of Truth, and the Gospel of the Egyptians. Of these, the most popular is the Gospel of Thomas, which is composed almost entirely of sayings, in Greek called logia, sayings attributed to Jesus, and some of the sayings have parallel sayings in the New Testament, and for all of these reasons it became very popular. This evening I want to take on the scrutiny, not in great detail, or even in minor detail, another one which is called the Gospel of Philip. The Apostle Philip being of considerable fame in biblical history, and to me always he stands in my memory because he is mentioned in one of my favorite blessings, which is the blessing of a car. Or if you go back further in history, the blessing of a chariot. Because, when in the blessings that have been devised over the ages, there is usually a biblical precedent whereby the church says, well, we are doing what has been done before, and so on. So in this case, it's about the Apostle Philip, who was riding on the road, and he encountered let's see, how is it called? He encountered a Saracen, a black man, which I'm sure was not that rare in Palestine at that time. And the man wanted his chariot to be blessed. And so there is a repetition of what Saint Philip the Apostle said when he blessed the chariot of the black man. So they probably wanted to preclude any accusations of racism against the New Testament. So they should see here the first chariot that was blessed by one of those people. In any event, that's how I always remember Saint Philip. Now, each one of the Gnostic Gospels has a particular character, as is quite understandable. And we already mentioned the basic character of Gospel of Thomas, which are sayings. And the sayings are on different subjects. So they are very much like the kind of collection that would be made if some literate people were present at the discourses of a teacher, probably a whole course that the teacher conducts, and then they wrote down individual sayings which they felt should be preserved for posterity. Now, the Gospel of Philip is different in nature, and it is mostly composed of statements which relate to a subject that may be mysterious to some people, but maybe not so mysterious to others. The technical term for it is sacramental theology. It's a big word, and I don't propose to explain it. And so I let you fantasize about it, what it might be. But to lead up to it, I might say that there's something really important about religious studies. And in my my inglorious academic career, I was teaching religion, and so a good teacher of religion will use this statement to the effect that all spiritual traditions, all religious traditions have at least two main aspects, two main sides. No matter where they are, no matter what part of the world, no matter what their subsequent history, and these two are doctrine and practice. Now, on the doctrinal side, we need to remember that doctrine simply is another word for teaching. And so religions, spiritual traditions all teach something. What do they teach? They teach their version of the cosmology, or what Max Heindel, the Rosicrucian, called the cosmo-conception, which I think is a labored translation of the German word Weltanschauung. And since Heindel was a German, that's quite possible. Why I brought that up, I really don't know, but it just seemed like a good idea at the time. that, in other words, it sort of answers the question, who are you and where are you? And that it describes the nature, usually the origins, according to that particular tradition, of the cosmic order within which we live, and our presence within it. In some mythic form, it expresses the story whereby we, the humans, have come to occupy a place within such a cosmic scheme, and what our purpose therein might be. Now, you might think that this is a sort of a fanciful way of dealing with sacred scripture, but I assure you that it is extremely important. And it is important because no matter what its content might be, from the very understandable to the very fanciful, a cosmology, a conception of life in the universe and of the role of the human within that universe is of extremely great importance. Why? The importance is primarily because if properly assimilated, such a picture of our position within the great cosmic order tells us very important things. It tells us in its own way who we are, why we are here, what our remote past in terms of a creation mythology might be, and what kind of future we might look out for. Mixed in with all of these, there are usually also admonitions of what would be the best way for us to behave ourselves here on earth while we are here, because if we go too much contrary to such injunctions, well, to say the least, we might get into trouble. And this is what comes with laws, commandments like the Ten Commandments, the laws of Manu in India, and many others. And that is a compendium of these factors makes a great deal of difference. Why? Because their result, if they are properly assimilated and treated in a reverent fashion, they may bring about a certain world image that will give the life of the individual a stability. The possibility of leading a disorganized and therefore unhappy life on earth is very great. Just a short time ago I heard on the radio that one of the latest statistics declares that this past year has been the one in US history most replete with suicide. Now you can have your own interpretation of that unhappy news, but let us say the indication is that meaninglessness, lack of purpose, individual or collective, and consequently the lack of an ability to relate in a meaningful manner to life and to other human beings, that these conditions can lead to great unhappiness, even to the point of people taking their own lives. So let's see what other anecdote may I introduce here. This anecdote you heard me introduce before, so you are not going to be too bored with it, and it has to do with the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous, which of course, where else, occurred in America, the land that could never come to terms with alcohol. I well remember when I was a little boy and I was reading the newspaper to my father. After about age 4, I was able to do that in the main. And then the newspaper also had cartoons, which is something, of course, generally liked by children. And there were all kinds of commotions and gangsters and so forth. And so I asked my father, what is this all about? Well, he says, in America, they have to sell wine and beer and schnapps and so forth in a surreptitious manner because it's illegal. So, I mean, you're not allowed legally to drink those things, I asked him. That's the truth. To which my improvident answer was, well, I sure hope I don't end up in that country. So look what happened. Look where I'm sitting. So in any event, it's an area of life which has been giving people problems around here for a long time. So we need to keep in mind that something like Alcoholics Anonymous obviously was very much needed and probably still is very much needed. It was founded by two people. I won't bore you with repeating their names, but one of them, who was probably the smarter of the two, had the idea of approaching the great and wise Dr. C.G. Jung of Switzerland with his idea of such a, at least, quasi-therapeutic procedure. He wrote to Jung. I saw the letter, and I saw the return letter too. So in the letter he just really outlined what Alcoholics Anonymous was trying to do and how. So Jung wrote back and he said that all the things that you are doing are well advised and will help, but there is something else that you need to introduce, and without which your plan is not going to work. And that something else is a meaningful reference to a supreme being. He actually used a different word, which doesn't come to me at this point. So that, let's say, a reference to a transcendental power, God, whatever you wish to call it, deity, he felt was absolutely essential. And that when this was not present, the foundations of the process of therapeutic process, because it's a therapy for alcoholics, of Alcoholics Anonymous would not work. Said that there has to be a foundation. Now I am more elaborating on that letter, but I'm still using Jung's own words. Jung also said that a psyche, soul, that is not anchored in God is going to come to a bad end. Now, to be anchored in something is to have a way of stability in your situation and in your condition. So let us say all of these matters that I now briefly outlined are of a nature which will give a helpful foundation to the life of an individual. And among these, certainly an important one is a reference to a transcendental source of life, of being, of existence, but also a number of others. And so there was an English philosopher. He was originally he used to have radio programs on philosophy and on religion on BBC. During World War II, he came to the United States. Few people know about him at the present time. His name was Gerald Heard. A fabulous individual. If you can get hold of any of his books, you should do so. By now, they should not cost a lot of money. In any event, Gerald Heard's elegant way of describing this particular issue was to say that the life of an individual and the life of a society, of a country, must have the grounding in a metaphysic. That's not the discipline of metaphysics, but a metaphysic, whereby he meant something beyond the physical, something that would give a meaningful description to life and act as a groundwork upon which life can be built. I always agreed with Gerald Heard on that point, and I still do, but at the same time, it is rather evident that this particular issue of how should we put it? The philosophical, the theoretical, and yet vital foundations of a human life has gone out of our society almost on a worldwide basis, but certainly in our country, and that we are suffering the lack thereof. So there must be certain foundations to life. The foundational principles, which would extend, of course, also to the regulation of the mind, the regulation of behavior, the regulation of society. I don't mean to advocate some sort of religious fascism, but let us say every spiritual system does bring forth such principles, and when they are taught, generally communicated to people fairly early in life. Why? Because those principles and maxims of behavior which are communicated to us early in life are likely to endure. They are likely to sink into our psyches and therefore create a certain foundation for further developments. Now, spiritual teachings, doctrines, whether they be found in the Bible or whether they be found in the Vedas and other sacred scriptures of India, or for that matter, in any other authoritative source, are of great influence in the life of a person. I don't know what got into my throat today, but it's better leave. In any event, while such teachings are usually part of the religious, of the spiritual matrix of a culture, they don't need to be inevitably professedly religious as such. So that, for instance, the rights and the wrongs of life, as to what are the deeds that if we perform them, we will be able to feel good about ourselves and we will probably get along well with other people, as contrasted with the deeds that will put us out of whack with people, and who knows ultimately perhaps with the cosmic order. These things have an abiding influence on the individual, and as such, it becomes a very important element in the foundational element in the life of people. The British, who after all are the parents of this language, have a good saying. When somebody performs some action that is not very acceptable, they will say it is not being done. And now, there doesn't have to be an elaborate explanation why a bad deed is not being done. It's just not being done. It's not the kind of thing that one does. That kind of an attitude is a very, very good one. Because if every set of our motivations were put under scrutiny as to why we are doing it, whether it's a psychological scrutiny or political scrutiny or otherwise, it would diminish the effectiveness of the principles under which we live. So that is one of the great reasons why an element of teaching is of great importance in spiritual traditions. Doctrine. However, obviously there are others. Among the others, there is practice. That's why I mentioned the two great groups are teaching and practice. And usually there is a relationship, of course, between the two. Among the practices of spiritual traditions, we find those that usually, having been tried over a long period of time, have become again very important in the life of the psyche of people, because for the most part spiritual practices, religious practices, sacraments, whatever we may wish to call them, are activities that have a close relationship to the inner life of the individual and which can deeply influence the psycho-spiritual processes that take place within the individual. And so therefore we have sort of these two, excuse me, we have these two pillars of the Temple of Solomon, of humanity, if we can use that term, that hold up the temple, and they are teaching and practice. And by the practice we mean here religious sacramental practices, prayers, holidays, all manner of activities in or outside of places of worship, private or in a place of worship, which are by their nature directed toward transcendental matters, toward those realities which transcend the physical world, and perhaps even much of the emotional and instinctual activities of humans. Excuse me. Now, that being the case, the Gospel of Philip, to a very large extent, addresses itself not like the Gospel of Thomas to teaching, or even the Gospel of Truth has a lot of teaching in it, but it addresses itself to the ways in which individual humans can address the transcendental dimension and become closer to that mysterious and mystical side of existence in which our existence, physical and intellectual and emotional, are rooted. In other words, they address themselves to the active relationship of the individual to the transcendental dimension, to divinity, to God, to the gods and goddesses, or whatever the particular system may have. And these in turn have also a very important influence on the life of people. Now, the Gospel of Philip very largely addresses itself to this, but again, to a great extent within the Gospel context of Jesus. So Jesus is the teacher in the Gospel of Thomas. Jesus is, I'm trying to think what to call him, is the Hierophant, the initiator, the bestower of transcendental grace and insight on his disciples in the Gospel of Philip. And there's a difference. And this is something that we can apply generally. For instance, because one is what the ancients, the Greeks, for instance, in their mystery systems, used to call theoria, from which the English theory is derived. It's conceptual. The other, however, is theurgical, as the ancients in their mysteries would call it, and theurgia in Greek means the divine work, working with or for or in conjunction with the divine, becoming a co-worker with the divine dimension of being. And for instance, the run-of-the-mill beautiful holidays of the Greeks and the Romans in olden days, there are some very, very nice pictures about them in the, at least I think they still are at the Getty Villa, by the great English painter Alma Tadema, whom I revere greatly, over these big, wonderful processions with flags and statues and all manner of things that the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks would periodically perform. And they instituted the holidays, which is holy on certain days. These were done. And people enjoyed themselves, and some like the Saturnalia, which roughly correspond to our Christmas and New Year, while in Rome, and Rome was never such a terribly happy place. It was full of brigands, even in ancient times and later on too. Kind of like the modern big cities in the United States, you know. You were not safe on the streets of Rome, not in the times of Caesar and not in the times of the Renaissance. There was always brigandage, there were always rowdies and various things. But on the times like in Saturnalia, which lasted for weeks, if you were lucky, everybody was happy as a lark. the emperor, like the Emperor Vespasian, who was known for that, would set up his own tent with his family on the streets of Rome. And the people could come there and he would serve them a meal. And they would have a great joyous time together, and others also. And everybody was trying to have fun, because many of the leading gods of antiquity were happy gods. Now, not all of them, but really most of them. And it's a nice thing to have happy gods. We don't have any now much. We don't, because our gods have become the people who live in the White House and hang around in Congress. God have mercy. I would much rather have the Roman gods than that crew, and so forth. And we, unfortunately, are greatly influenced and patterned ourselves by these local deities. But that was not the case before. In any event, that was one side of the spirituality, to pay homage to the other side, and in a joyous manner. On the other hand, you had, probably going back to prehistoric times, we don't really know, we had something else. And those were the mysteries. The mysteries were things that involved doing something. The mysteries were things that meant experiencing something. They were the experiential interaction with transcendence, with the transcendental world. And one of the names for mysterion in Latin was also sacramentum, a holy thing. Now, this is the kind of thing that Gospel of Philip addresses itself to, and just like the Gospel of Thomas, it attributes the origin and the institution of these sacred practices to the founder of the religion, namely to Jesus. So we still have sayings of Jesus, and kind of a recension of his sayings about the mystery, the practical, particularly the practical side of the Christian dispensation. And once again, even if I repeat myself, let me indicate that these teachings and practices were regarded as twins not to be separated. In other words, if your worldview is such and such, then you ought to also do certain things. You should perform certain actions. And the performance of these actions is what constituted in ancient and pagan times the mysteries. And the mysteries were the reenactment of, with all kinds of complicating factors, of the sacred drama of the divinities. For instance, the most famous and the most long-lived of the mysteries of antiquities, being the Eleusinian mysteries, was the reenactment of the great drama of two of the chief goddesses, of Demeter and Persephone. Persephone often being referred to as Kore, which just means the girl. She was the girl goddess. And the other one was Meter, the mother goddess. So the mother and the daughter. By by reenacting in a meaningful fashion, participating in the heritage. Dramatic, sacramental, all kinds, many of which we don't know because much of the mysteries was secret. People gained the participation in the life of the gods and of the goddesses. No wonder Cicero, for instance, I think was the one who wrote this, who greatly admired the mysteries, said that the Eleusinian mysteries were the most ennobling activity of the ancient world. It changed people from barbarians, from untutored and uncultivated people, to people who were good, who were wise, and I think that also comes from Cicero, although others mentioned it too, everyone who went through the greater mysteries of Eleusis lost forever his or her fear of death. Now, I venture to suggest that any activity of whatever sort that can take the fear of death away from you just forever, not just for a short time, but altogether, is a monumental achievement of transcendental psychology. Now then, the Gospel of Philip indicates very clearly, on the basis of the recorded sayings attributed to Jesus, that the early Christian religion, going back to its founder, in addition to its teachings, obviously, also contained mysteries, and that Jesus conferred mysteries which brought about a perpetual and abiding change, interior change in the people to whom the mystery was conveyed. This is a very important issue. Now, it is true, and it's fairly evident, that these mysteries that we are mentioning, at least in truncated form, were survived. They didn't go out of business, thank God. But at the same time, they also obviously lost a great deal of their initial transformative power, and people had to find ways in which to practice them, which would cause, let's say, the necessary interior change in the people. So, on the one hand, an image of human life in the world, in relationship to other humans, in relationship to the natural world, to animals and so forth, which would introduce a feeling for and a subservience to a greater natural order. In other words, the presence of transcendence in the world and the ability of the individual to move such transcendence even though living here on earth. It's a very important thing. And you find that in some religious circles even today, but I'm afraid that at least in our culture, to a very large extent, it has disappeared. And the other is the performance of certain actions, the participating in certain practices, which by way of the presence of the human in that practice would, and of course with the right attitude of mind, would change the soul, the very soul and the very consciousness of the individual, and put such an individual in touch, in permanent touch, in fact, with transcendental forces. And these mystery practices are mentioned, and there are hints given concerning their nature and their intentions quite abundantly in the Gospel of Philip. Now, with my old and creaking geriatric memory, I'm trying to remember some of the, well, at least one of the principal sayings about this. This is very much like Thomas in its format. He said, the Lord, it's like saying Jesus said, but he did more here than say. He did that, the Lord did everything in a mystery. A baptism and a chrism and a anyway, I have it written about a baptism and a chrism and a where it's the apolytrosis. I know it in Greek and I don't know it at the moment.
Redemption?
Yes, the redemption and the bride chamber. Okay. Now, excuse me?
Eucharist.
And the Eucharist. Look at the one that I left out, but I have somebody who knows it. Right? The Eucharist and the redemption and the bride chamber. Now, here we are. 5 are mentioned, which later on, by some manipulations and so were extended by people to 7. So, what do we have here? We have a mystery sequence of actions which, at least when he was there, Jesus himself was bestowing on those who came to him. As to what preliminary exercises he may have put them through, or any of these ancillary actions that pertain to a mystery, we don't know. But we know that there were certain definite mysteries which were designed to change the psyche, change the soul of the individual. So what we have here is something not all that much different, at least in basic format, from the mysteries of the so-called pagans in antiquity. They had a cosmology, they knew about their gods, they knew what the various gods and goddesses were doing, how they related to each other. It can even get quite complex, and how to deal with them, how to pray to them, how to sacrifice to them. But then, in addition to that, there was a way of the initiate, the person who has been initiated, undergoing an essential and abiding change. We call that change nowadays very often transformation. And this transformative change was the essence of the mysteries. The people coming out of the temples of the mysteries of the underground initiatory facilities, let's say, of Elefsis and so forth, were different. They had changed. And so apparently were those who underwent the mysteries that were administered by Jesus, and subsequently by those hierophantic successors of Jesus himself. Now then, this being the case, we may be assured, if we add up the evidence, that is actually not that difficult to find. In the Gospel of Philip itself, in other of the Gnostic Gospels, in some of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, for instance, very, very clear expression of it in the treatise of the 8th and the 9th, where a transformative journey, a flight into the higher worlds is taken place by an initiator and his student, and all of these various statements indicate to us that once some people were attracted to this new religion, the way was open to those who desired it to intense, personal and highly transformative experiences. Now, this is all introduction, and I probably ought to be quitting, but maybe not quite yet. So, what was the let's say the culmination? What was the goal of these experiences? We have a hint in the statements regarding the Gospel of Philip and others that the highest of the mysteries which Jesus himself administered, and after him other hierophantic successors, was something called the bride chamber. The two great sacraments that were suppressed subsequently were the bride chamber and what introduced the bride chamber, which was really the great decision-making sacrament, where the individual decided that he or she would now become different, would enter the greater world, would re-enter his origins, and then be an utterly transformed individual. So these were the two that subsequently have been suppressed. Apolytrosis was the Greek word for the initiation, where the person was by his or her own volition was taken out of the ordinary pursuits of humanity and learned how to say no to the world by saying, I certainly can't repeat the words primarily because I don't know them, and that's a pretty good reason, But let us say, at a certain point after the other mysteries that the person went through, they were able to say, I don't really belong with my full mind and my full soul to this world wherein we live. I belong somewhere else. I want to remember that, and I want to so be transformed that I once again will be a full-fledged member of the transcendental world, of the pleroma, of the fullness, whatever we wish to call it, and thereby be joined to what the ancient pagans would call the world of the gods, and probably by Christians and so forth called the world of God and of the saints. Now, but there is a strange and difficult to approach, difficult to comprehend element in the highest of these mysteries, the mystery of the bride chamber. Some of you may recall on the last occasion when we spoke about the strange adventures of the Apostle Thomas, in the Acta or the Acts of Thomas, that when he's on his way to India, where he eventually lives and dies, when he's on his way to India, he's invited to a wedding. And this is an other than ordinary wedding. And as the action proceeds, as he comes up to the wedding and meets the various people, it becomes obvious that he's in an altered state of consciousness, that this wedding is something mystical. It is not just a wedding of a gentleman and a lady. When he becomes, all the symbols point to that. You have the bridesmaids and the bridegrooms who correspond to the planets, and it's a cosmic and a transcosmic event. And then once he is able to view this and to experience some of it, then he is led out, and the next day he takes the ship and then eventually goes to India. But let us say that is a sort of an indication of the idea of a sacred wedding. And this is not an ordinary human marriage, but it is, as some of the sayings of Jesus, even in the Gospel of Thomas, and certainly in Philip, indicate, I won't try to recall too many of them right now, is that there occurs a mystical unification of the individual, a union. And what unites? What kind of union are we talking about here? What unites is the dualities in human nature. So underlying the mystery practices, which are indicated in the Gospel of Philip, is the notion that as the result of us having come into this world, on having undergone that particular creative process, we are now very dual creatures. That is why Jesus says, I will teach you how to make the male and the female into a single one. And a number of statements like that. A unification, and why the male and the female? Well, certainly not because of an anticipation of our argumentative condition at the present time as to whether we are male or female or something else, but rather that the most evident manifestation of the polarities, of the dualities of life, which we undergo and which we come in contact with here on earth, are the masculine and the feminine, although there are many others. So what the masculine and the feminine, the mention of the masculine and the feminine in this regard is a metaphor for all of life. All of our lives are beset by the tug-of-war of the dualities. We can see the one now that has entered public life of masculine and feminine, but masculine and feminine, old and young, rich and poor, different races, all manner of often complementary syzygies, which is a Greek word, syzygia, syzygies of existence. And our lives are taken up with these. I mean, something, I'm trying to think of something really trite, which shouldn't be difficult for me. But one of them being, let's say, go into a dining room somewhere, and I see the dishes that are being served, and they tear me apart. is, should I eat a goulash, which as a Hungarian I undoubtedly would opt for, or should I do the I don't know, the burger. The burger. Okay, fine. The voice of rural America. The burger, yeah. So, which in that case, perhaps in most instances would not be such a difficult choice. But let us see, we are torn this way, we are torn that way, constantly. Political parties, religions, families, family feuds, feuds within the family, feuds outside of the family, feuds with the neighbors' pets, one thing after the other. But all of them involve conflict. And conflict, in turn, involves at least two parties to have a conflict. Now, you might say that there is, of course, self-induced conflict, yeah. In fact, much of this is of that nature. But we are thrown into conflictual situations, conflictual relationships, which disturb us and which do not allow us to do what every religion commands us to do, which is perhaps so beautifully expressed in the Psalms, to lift our eyes to the everlasting hills, whence cometh our help. So when we are conflictually constellated, when we are fighting within ourselves, then our ability to rise beyond the world of conflict is very greatly limited. So in order for us to become ready for transcendence, in order for us to use a very common religious expression which should not be taken literally, in order for us to go to heaven, we have to overcome the tug of war in our nature. Manifold tug of war. You can see it with children already, you can see it with others. So let's say we are constitutionally predisposed to an ongoing internal conflict, of which the external conflicts are the expressions. Look at all the wars. The World War I, we thought, that was the biggest of all wars, was barely over 20 years, here's a new war. Look what's going on now in Ukraine and so forth. So you see the conflict, the martiality, the way in which we are hostile to each other, the expressions of hostility are always there, and they literally hamstring us and prevent us from doing more important things. No doubt about it. That is why, if we had any sense, which we don't, we would recognize that being hypercritical and hostile to each other is not only a waste of time, which it is in addition to everything else, but it prevents us from feeling and thinking and doing things that would really be helpful to us and to others, and I would say, to the world and to humanity. Our potential for the good is inhibited by the conflictual nature within us. And of course, on a daily basis, probably the best way to deal with this is that when you develop these conflictual feelings towards somebody else or other senses, so try to tell yourself, look, it's not to be done, it's not important. But we have within us a center of anger. In fact, interestingly enough, knowing languages sometimes is quite informative. The German language, which is I was bilingual as a child. In the German language, evil is the same word as the angry thing, das Böse. Very strange. So there is something inside of us that predisposes us to get angry. And that anger, of course, brings unhappy and evil things into our lives. So in any event, let's say it is fairly evident, particularly from Philip and from various other Gnostic scriptures. I don't even know a single scripture of Nag Hammadi where you don't find evidence of this, that we are in need of an internal straightening out, an internal reconciliation, an internal exorcising of anger, of hostility, of conflict. Not just with others, but of course primarily the conflict within ourselves. And that this is, if you want to have some certainty about what our principal problem is, it's this, that we are divided beings. We are not whole. We are not unified. And incidentally, interestingly enough, languages are very informative, and in many languages, if you want to find a good word for healthy, it will be the equivalent of being whole, being complete, being unified. And it's easy to repeat that, if I take this pill, I'm going to be whole. Well, maybe it will make a hole in in some organ, but that's just a similarity in words. So that this is now extremely important, because the first question that people usually ask, they might not ask me, they might ask themselves when this particular proposition is put. All right, so Jesus had a way of making people whole, of taking the conflict out of them. Good. What happened to that? When he ascended, did he take it with him? How come that method that he devised, the reunification of the opposites in the individual, the bridal chamber, is not among us so that we can get hold of it? Why has this great task of the internal reconciliation been diminished and disappeared? And can it in some fashion be found elsewhere? Well, there was a man by the name of Carl Jung, who I think pretty much discovered what happened to this, to the great reconciliation which the Gnostics practiced, because it was given to them by the founder of the Christian religion. What happened to it was that largely because they themselves were subject to persecution, accusation of heresy, and all kinds of things, it had to be changed into a different discipline, which, however, did the trick. And interestingly enough, where do you think that different discipline, which I think Jung was quite correct, this is implicit and explicit in his writings, and I agree with them. Where do you think that reconciliation effort, the practice of of making peace within the contending dual forces inside of the human, what happened to it, and where did it take new shape? In Egypt. Well, of course, Egypt was the home of wisdom to begin with. It was also the home of the Gnostics, the Neoplatonists, various other mystics of the time. And when the Hermeticists, and when the Gnosis itself came to be suppressed, largely by forces in the Roman Empire in various places, then something arose that would not arrest the negative attention of the authorities. That was always important, If you want to live a reasonably happy life, don't run foul of the authorities, because they really know how to make life miserable for you, Everybody else, your wife, your family, your neighbors, they are nothing compared to your governments. And the governments are the biggest malefactors in the universe. But in any event, they thought of something that certainly would have been very difficult for anybody to figure out. They thought of a discipline which was seemingly of a scientific nature, and was also, its practitioners were also just called the philosophers, although it just really meant lovers of wisdom. And it got the name from the Arabs who came to Egypt after a certain period of time, to the great discomfort of many of the Egyptian Copts, I'm sure, but that it had the Arabic name Al-Chem. Chem was the ancient name of Egypt. It means the dark land. Why is it the dark land? Not because of racial things or things of that sort, but because the Nile Valley turns dark, at least once a year when the floods come and they bring the mud, the black mud of the Nile, and spread it over the countryside, which then makes for very good agriculture, grows excellent cotton. I think even now some of the best cotton in the world is grown in Egypt. So Al-Chem, the Egyptian thing. So what was the Egyptian thing? The Egyptian thing subsequently in English is called alchemy. Now alchemy is based on the proposition that we are in this divided state. We have, people make a lot about evolution. I don't. In fact, I like to pronounce it like the preachers on Sunday evening radio, evolution. Well, simply because I felt that the conjoining of the evolutionary principle with spiritual matters often went wrong. So it's really just a mistake. But so what we have here is not evolution, but we have transformation. Alchemy is based on the principle that the human being, body and soul and whatever else there may be, is capable of transformation. And that if it undergoes the right kind of transformation over the right period of time in the right way, it can become more than human. And that indeed, this is what I would say, without being too simplistic about it, this is what the ancient mysteries of the pagans were doing. They found ways whereby psychological processes took place within the individual. Within the individual, they took place processes which were conducive to the internal unification of the person. And this became the quasi-scientific, but certainly very, very well-regarded discipline of alchemy throughout the ages. Now, what is the difference between growth, which we use a lot, and transformation? Well, we know a plant will grow from a seed, and so on. It is a potential that is in a particular portion of a plant and then grows, and eventually maybe grows big, grows into a tree. But transformation is something else. We don't have too many examples of transformation in nature. One of them, which is present in various species, but one of them you will find in a silkworm, for instance. Now, where I grew up, for reasons that don't concern us, people used to cultivate silkworms. And they eat leaves of a particular tree, the mulberry tree, at least our silkworm. Maybe it's a Hungarian diet for silkworms. In any event, you should just hear those suckers when they are all over a mulberry tree and when they are eating. You can hear the chomping from a couple of blocks. They are very voracious creatures. But when the silkworm, gets to a certain stage, then he spins himself into a cocoon, which of course is true of other insects as well. And what happens inside of this cocoon? A new creature comes out. But this new creature is entirely different from the old creature that had spun the cocoon. When it comes out, it's entirely different. It has been transformed. It transformed itself into, something that resembles a little butterfly. It has wings. It is a completely different creature. Transformation. So transformation is different from evolution. That's why I am critical of what I think has become the sometimes excessive attention lavished on the evolutionary principle among my theosophical friends and so forth. Because if it were not for transformation, you could evolve till the cows come home. You could keep on evolving and you would just evolve into more and more monsters. But if you have transformation, and not just evolution, that's something else. This is the kind of evolution that was envisioned by alchemy. Now, the alchemists were in a difficult situation. Why? Because by the time there was a need for them, by the time they were an essential discipline for at least some people, by that time the whole Gnostic orientation toward life and the transformation into something more than human was considered a heresy. So if you were advocating spiritual transformation by way of magic, by way of various practices that have been used to that end, you were in danger. And eventually the unholy Inquisition would get hold of you in a certain historical period and would make your end somewhat characterized by excessive heat. It would. And so they devised a magnificent disguise, which was more than a disguise. It worked. It demonstrated a transformation, and it also had the power, when properly undertaken with prayers and meditations and various appertaining magical practices, that as the substances, physical substances, transformed in the alchemical retort in the alchemist's laboratory, a corresponding transformation was facilitated in the individual. So it became a symbol system which facilitated, and if correctly undertaken, ultimately brought about transformation. Now, our time is racing along with us, but let us say I have a very bare outline of some of the major stages of the transformation process that I have on that paper. And the paper starts with the untransformed substances, which is symbolized as a square. Why? Because the untransformed world, both ours as individuals and of humanity, is what? Is a fourfold structure. We are earth, water, fire, and air, as the ancients would call it. Or if you want to use Dr. Jung's psychological transliteration of that, then we are physical and emotional and intuitive and mental, which is 4 right there. So we are a fourfold being, but this fourfold being is what psychology after the coming of death psychology around 1900 came to call ego. And this ego is composed of the ego carries consciousness in these 4 functions, but there is something else beyond the ego. And what is beyond the ego is what has been called all kinds of things. The Hindus call it Atman, the Buddhists call it Buddha nature, and we might call it a higher self. Sometimes it is called a spirit, as contrasted with soul. Now, when that is added, that is the beginning of transformation. So the fourfold structure, the 4 breaks up and becomes, as you say, the massa confusa. So as the alchemical process takes place, and it involves all kinds of things, it's quite a complex process with various chemicals and the steady flame of the alchemist. If you see a replica of an alchemist's kitchen, it's the most fantastic thing. It's the most interesting thing. I think the only place where I saw one was in Germany, I think it's pretty much in state Baden-Württemberg or close to it. There's a little town named Knittlingen. Only the Germans have such a language that you Knittlingen, kind of like a Knackwurst. It's not a Knackwurst, it's a Knackwurst, which means a popping sausage. You bite into it, it knacks. See what an expert I am on the on the alchemy of sausages. In any event, in Knittlingen, it has the reputation from the Middle Ages of being the town of Dr. Faustus. There's a beautiful statue of Faustus outside, and Faustus, apparently having been a historical figure, who was an alchemist and a magician, and who eventually became the semi-fictitious protagonist of Goethe's great, magnificent drama, Faust. Now, Dr. Faustus apparently lived there, and since he was an alchemist, the clever Germans constructed a miniature alchemical kitchen. It was only about this big, you know. In it were all, you had to look close, in it were all the implements and what is supposed to be in an alchemist's kitchen, the retorts and the various chemicals and the fire burning and so forth. Very fascinating sight. And so there was definitely an ongoing physical aspect to it. There was physical alchemy. So that the alchemist would be facilitating, nourishing, bringing about a very dramatic transformation of various physical substances in the alchemist's laboratory, in the alchemist's kitchen. So it's a visible, tangible thing. But somehow it was designed by those who made this change, that if it is combined with certain processes of the mind, you might say, if there are certain meditations and prayers and invocations being uttered while the physical process takes place, an internal transformation of a related, commensurate nature takes place, so that the alchemist himself transforms in his soul and eventually becomes what the mythological objective of the alchemical process is supposed to be, the lapis philosophorum, as it's called in Latin, the philosopher's stone. So what you really have here is a ritual disguised as a science. And it was very popular. It and certainly was conducive to the personal transformation, we might say, the enlightenment of many alchemists. Now, you know, we had lectures here and various exhibits even of alchemy, so I'm not going to go into the details. But what we have is that what happens in the alchemist's kitchen, laboratory, can take place within the individual in a psycho-spiritual way. And so first we have the breaking up of the physical matter. Then we have the big chaos reconstituting itself of the new order, that is the massa confusa. And then it's no longer the fourfold world of earth, water, fire, and air, but it is the transformed world of the attempted unification. And the symbols whereby this was expressed were many. I recommend one which you will find in Jung's collected writings. There is one called The Practice of Psychotherapy that has I think that's what he published it elsewhere too, that has the 10 pictures of an alchemical treatise that in Latin is called the Rosarium Philosophorum, the Rosary of the Philosophers. Well, why Rosary? Because the Rosary has 10 beads. So it's a symbol for a tenfold structure. And what you have there, you have the dualities. And these dualities, where the one wears the moon, the other one wears the sun. They are called the king and the queen. And they come together and they begin to relate to each other. And there are 10 incidents whereby they come closer and closer to each other. And eventually next to the 10th picture, when they come together, they embrace and they become one. And the dualities of life, the dualities of the mind have become a unity. But there are other ways of symbolizing it. But let us say this was the alchemical opus, the alchemical work, that the dualities, and not just one duality, but the dualities of human nature are unified into a oneness. The psychological term for it used by Jung in Jungian psychology was simply the unification or the individuation. Why? Because an individuum in German means a singular, unbreakable unity. If you are a true individual, you cannot be divided anymore. An indivisible unity. And this is what must happen to us. So you see, it's not a matter, and the alchemists were quite insistent on but their heresies were not easily discovered, that we need not to castigate, to torment, and to deprive any part of our body, either by diet or by sexual abstinence or whatever the case may be. But we must undergo a process wherein the conflicting portions of our being cease the conflict and eventually become one. And this one is what? I think that the monotheistic religions, like the religion of the Prophet Muhammad, were right when they said that, or the Jewish religion, Lord, the Lord our God is one. That is the embodiment, the manifestation in earthly existence of the transcendental and of the divine. From the many to the one. From the many to the dual, from the dual to the one. And so for centuries upon centuries, people in the Western culture practiced alchemy, and those who knew what alchemy was really about were not interested in making gold, which incidentally was never the purpose of alchemy anyway, because the purpose of any kind of alchemy is to produce the Philosopher's Stone, which is a divine and miraculous object. If you produce the Philosopher's Stone itself is such a magical object that it can change ignoble metals into noble metals. It's the stone, the Philosopher's Stone, that would make the gold, not the alchemist. So that kind of puts a damper on the people's great excitement about making gold. But let us say there is the magical powers of the Philosopher's Stone are very, very numerous. And why? Because the Philosopher's Stone is the result of the alchemical process, and it is the birth of the Philosopher's Stone, which in turn is the manifestation of deity in human form. The deified human is, as some of the alchemists, I think maybe Gerhard Dorn, the great Dutch alchemist, wrote about the Philosopher's Stone being the ultimate unification of the human. So the ultimate result, the living, therefore be living Philosopher's Stones. So let's see, we had a strange and mysterious and controversial discipline that prevailed in our culture for many centuries, that only went into partial obscuration, sort of the coming with the scientific era, and some of the great lights of, which really should be recognized as lights of modern science, at least the direct ancestors, like the great father of chemistry, Paracelsus, or you want his whole name, Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Paracelsus of Rome. No, how do you like that? In any event, these people themselves became magical individuals who had shown transcendental enlightenment in their lives. So that alchemy, as Dr. Quispel, the great Gnostic scholar and good friend of Jung, who came here to visit us in Southern California several times, Dr. Quispel said at one time, alchemy is the yoga of the Gnostics. I can see him standing on the dais at Philosophical Research Society mentioning that. But of course it is a symbolic discipline. And you have to understand the symbols. You have to practice and put the symbols into practice. And so I think that the Gospel of Philip is the original source of alchemy, in the sense that it manifests the need for alchemy and the fact that the great one who came from outside of this world to help humanity, the anointed one, the Christos, one of, at least according to Gnostic teachings, one of a series of messengers of light, had brought the essential elements of transformation, which later on became alchemy, into the world, and that the art of the Christian transformation, the transformation brought by this particular great teacher, that this art is an art of ultimately becoming one, of transforming the many into the one, and to bringing about that replay of the true creation. Because we all, according to the most believable myths, creation myths, we all come from the one. We all come from a unity, and that unity then pours itself out into a system of great variety, within which there are so many contrary and oppositional forces that struggle with each other, make love with each other, do all kinds of things with each other, but eventually they find the way to become one. And that oneness is the recovery of the divinity. So This is the underlying principle, Crispell was right, of all yogas, and everything else is sort of window dressing, you know, window dressing. What do you expect of a lot of greenery or vegetarianism, but to be a window dressing? You know, well, if not window dressing, then dressing on your plate. You know, people then mistake the accompanying folderol for the real thing, but the real thing is transformation. We are not to remain the way we are. We are to transform. Why? Because the transformation brings us back to our original state, brings us back to our original condition, mythologically speaking, lets us into our Father's house. And really, if we have some individual insight, some ways of looking within ourselves, certainly not all the time, but from time to time, then we will find that what we are longing for is a unity, a unification within ourselves and with an ineffable greatness. That we were created, we were born from the One, and we are destined to return to the One. This is the path of Gnosis. And how that happens? It happens by transformation. The alchemists found a way, but of course that transformative activity can take other shapes. But transformation, unification, becoming an indivisible unity, that is our glorious destiny, which, however, we can delay if we are caught up in preoccupations, in activities which are not part of that and which are contrary to that. This is the striving for the One. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Hear, O Alchemist, the stone, the lapis, the miraculous object from heaven, the white stone who had fallen from heaven is one. And we are destined to become that oneness. Why not facilitate it a bit? And I think the mere fact that those of us, like this evening, able to come together here on an unusual and generally unknown subject like the Gospel of Philip, little did you think that you're going to get a lecture on alchemy, of course. We know that. And once again, this is the metaphysic that Gerald Hurd was speaking about, the greater mysterious scheme into which this fits. And it's actually it's the most exciting thing in the world. At a nonagerian, I can testify to it. I have pursued it according to my limited abilities since I was a very young man. I never let go of it. And I think the path of transformation, the path of Gnostic alchemy, the path of the sacraments when they are practiced in the Christian fashion is a marvelous thing. And it is the greatest help whereby we can facilitate our reunification within ourselves and of ourselves with the ineffable greatness that gave us life, that gave us birth, and that now calls out to us. So let's try to listen when we can, listen a little bit. Occasionally when I listen, I hear a strange voice that says, yes, yes, do the work and come home. Do the work and come home. And to the limits of my ability and to my failures, which we all encounter, I try to do it. But I can assure you that there is a home, and with God's help and with our own alchemy, that's where we are going, and that's where we will be, and it will be glorious. Thank you very much.